and welcome to Book It. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. Today we are diving into a business book that looks at the massive consumer strength of the Hispanic population in the United States and how companies are often missing that opportunity. Joining us is Isaac Mizrahi, CEO of the award-winning advertising agency Alma. He's also a leading voice in multicultural marketing and author of the book Hispanic Market Power. Isaac, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Carol. My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. So let's start with some of the numbers that you detail in your book because they are powerful. What does the most recent census tell us about the U.S. population?
62 million Hispanics in the country, representing 19% of the population. Compared to the 2010 census, this is a 51% increase.
Wow.
Actually, 51% is the percentage of increase that Hispanics represented in the whole country, meaning half of the population growth between 2010 and 2020 came from the Hispanic segment.
So that is massive. And then what do we also know then about the spending power of that base?
$2 trillion in spending power. This is increasing over the years, mostly because the Hispanic household income is getting better as education attainment is getting better. Hispanics are graduating more from high schools, from colleges, and that is improving their salaries and their household income. So we are seeing more purchasing power, making this segment even more attractive to brands and advertisers.
So what are brands missing, though?
I think there has been a significant change, Carol, between where we are today and where we were 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I immigrated to this country 25 years ago. The majority of the Hispanic population was still immigrant and still perceived as low income, unacculturated, and didn't speak English. So there are a lot of negative perceptions about the purchasing power and the economic interest of this segment. Right now, fast forward to 2024, 2/3 of the Hispanic population actually was born in the U.S. They are bicultural, they are bilingual, language is not a barrier anymore. However, what people are missing, what brands are missing, is the perception that Hispanics are necessarily acculturating to the Anglo culture in America. Hispanics, they want to be perceived as Americans and Latinos at the same time. They want to retain part of their culture. And this is something that most brands are missing because they are treating the Hispanic, mainly the youth, as regular Americans, white Caucasian consumers.
In fact, that's something you touch on in the book because you say at one point, forget assimilation.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, assimilation is something that's very, very close to the American culture because in the 20th century, if you look at the massive waves of immigrants from different countries, including a lot of people from my background, Jewish, they assimilated, the famous melting pot. Right now, the melting pot analogy is no longer valid. Maybe a better analogy would be a salad bowl, that you have the tomatoes, the lettuce, the onions.
That's good.
We are part of a salad. We are
Yes.
still combined as a salad, but we retain our individuality. And there are a lot of theories why the Hispanic consumer, the young generations, they want to retain their individuality. First of all, they are proud of it. They are not hiding anymore. But second, technology helped Latinos to be connected to the Latino culture, to entertainment, to sports, to music, to culinary, festivals. Today, we live in this era that you can have access on your cell phone to almost anything that you want.
Yes.
And that allowed the young generations to be connected to it. I know because I have 2 kids, teenagers, that are still consuming a lot of the American Anglo culture, but connected to the Latin culture in some ways.
So to go back to marketing for a moment here, to put this in plain speak, you say in the book that there is this tendency, this antiquated approach to marketing to the Hispanic population that is essentially, translating into Spanish is enough, adding some mariachis, that's going to make us connect. That feels very reductive, and I can't imagine, but you tell me, that it doesn't seem like it would be very effective.
No, because you're absolutely right. This new generation, they want the duality. They want the nuance. They want to be recognized for who they are, and not necessarily the abuela, the mariachis, the extended goal related to soccer, right? They're going to connect emotionally. The secret to connect effectively almost with any target, we're not talking about Latinos anymore, is to connect at an emotional level.
Sure.
Something that is going to make you remember that message, that brand, that piece of communication at an emotional level that allow you to retain that message or even share with your family and friends, right? And the emotional is connected to something that's very important to your heart, to your soul. That's why Alma is named Alma, because that means soul in Spanish, right? And the nuances of the day-to-day, the specific aspects of somebody's lives, these are the things that, you know, we believe that advertisers, they need to be looking at in order to effectively connect with this target.
Do you think that multicultural consumers feel more broadly that brands are not listening to them?
Absolutely. I not only feel, but this is actually survey research. Nielsen, a big research institute, they actually, a few months ago, they released another study compared to a same questionnaire that they had 5 years ago, 2023 versus 2018. And one of the questions was, do you feel that advertisers and brands reflect your culture in their marketing plans? And the numbers actually came down. And the majority of the Hispanics and a significant majority of the younger millennials and Generation Zs, they feel that they don't see their culture and lives reflected in advertising, which is a great area of opportunity for advertisers that are consistent and committed to connect with Latinos. And Carol, you see that I'm using the word connect purposefully, because a lot of people want to reach Hispanics. Reaching is not connecting. Reaching is almost a media factor. Connecting is an emotional factor. And I think that's a very important distinction that I talk to my clients and my prospects all the time.
You've touched on this a bit, but one of the most interesting aspects of the book to me was your discussion around cultural nuance. For example, humor, and what can literally be lost in translation. Can you give us an example of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a great example, Carol, because actually I think it's an example that any American may understand, because you have a great difference between the humor that a British comedian may use versus an American comedian. The language is the same. Both are telling that joke or they're acting in English, but there is a difference between the wit, the cleverness, the style. The same goes in a deeper level with the Hispanic community. Sometimes we feel that, you know, the humor that you see in advertising can be too dry or too nasty sometimes, making fun of, you know, somebody's appearance or way. Latinos tend to be a little bit more conservative on that way. Let me give another example different from humor, if I may. Latinos tend to spend a little bit more time in the introduction of a conversation. How are you? How was your day? We don't go straight to the point sometimes. And that's part of our culture. And when it comes to advertising, sometimes advertisers like go straight to the point. Let me tell you, the this is why you need to buy us. And you know, there is no romance, there is no storytelling. We love a storytelling. I think human beings love storytelling, but Latinos, we love novellas, right?
Yes.
We love a way that, you know, you don't go straight to the point trying to sell me a service or a product. Why don't you entertain me a little bit?
You also include in the book some fascinating research about kids and sleepovers. And on the face of it, you might say, well, what do kids and sleepovers have to do with business? Can you explain that?
I think this is one of the elements that we're trying to say. This is not about language, it's about culture. This is actually based on research that Hispanics and African American moms and dads, they are a little bit more reluctant to allow their kids to have sleepovers, right? You know, play dates are okay, but you know, they tend to be a little bit more protective. No judgment here.
Right.
Facts, just facts. Now, if you know this and you're going to apply in advertising, you may avoid to have a scene that the kids are having a sleepover, because you know that this is not a significant part of the culture of specific segments like the African Americans and Hispanics. So nuances, and sometimes people ask me, but is this right or wrong? I say it is what it is.
Right.
If you really want to connect effectively with your segment, you need to learn about your segment.
You mention in the book that it is time to rethink Hispanic Heritage Month. So
Yes.
how so?
Well, you know, as a Latino, I feel proud that there is a month to celebrate Hispanics and Latinos in America. I think it's good, don't get me wrong. But some marketers and advertisers, they only focus on us during that month with a social media post, maybe a little video, and that's it. And based on everything that we've been discussing, I try to reflect in my book, you know, I prefer actually you do nothing than you only do that, because it becomes almost offensive. Oh, it's a patronizing a little bit. Hey, that's your month, let me do something and move on to the next month. In America, you have something every month, right? And I think that a lot of consumers, they know that. And that's another thing, Carol, that I see. Consumers are much smarter than some people think. They actually know when somebody is patronizing them, somebody's trying to get their service, their dollars, but are not recognizing who they are, and also they are not investing in their community.
Tell us a little bit about your journey. I know you moved here, I think you said in 1999.
Yes.
And what was starting over here in another country like for you, and how did that shape your approach to this work?
It was never planned. I know that some people like to plan their whole life and say, one day I'm going to do that. I was working at the Coca-Cola company.
Yes.
I was an employee at Coke Brazil. An opportunity came up and they asked me, would you like to be considered for a position working in Atlanta for the Latin America group of Coke? And I said, I guess, yeah. Yes. I was newly married at that time, months, really, literally months. I have to talk to my then newly wife and say, what do you think? And thank God she said, yes, let's go for that adventure. And
lucky you.
It was supposed to be 3 or 5 years and maybe go back to Latin America, and it's been 25. Actually, this year, that's my 25th anniversary here in the U.S. Of course, in the process, I became a citizen, raising 2 American boys with Latino culture, and I cannot be happier with this decision. It changed my life, and then I became part of this multicultural segment, which is something that I can bring a little bit who I am, but also help my clients and the business to understand the new paradigms from a demographic standpoint.
Tell us a little bit about your experience of writing this book, because I hear that you had a pretty good editor.
Yes, during COVID, I decided to do some investigation, and I reached out to my editor, Chiqui Cartagena, which is one of the leading experts on multicultural market in America.
We are familiar with her here.
So Chiqui wrote a few books, and I reached out to her and other authors that I respect, and I say, what do you think? Some people are telling me about this opportunity. Do you think this is a valid proposition? And all of them, they said yes, but Chiqui went one step further. She said, yes, and I want to help you with that. And that put a pressure, because if it's a project that you have in your mind, you may postpone.
Yes, right? That's right.
And you may forget. Now I had like a cheerleader, supporter, a partner in crime that was asking me and giving me deadlines and setting up next steps. And I don't think that without Chiqui, this project would have happened with this timeline or even at all.
Yes, and we should point out that for people who don't know, that Chiqui is our executive director here and has written a couple books, as you said, on this topic herself. So that was great to hear. Just a last question for you, Isaac. You certainly make the case for why brands and companies should invest in multicultural marketing. But what if they don't? What is the opportunity cost if they don't?
That's a great question, and I address in the book, which is exactly the concept of opportunity costs. When you're not doing anything, you're making a decision to leave a significant market for your competitors. The biggest risk is your competitor going ahead of you and getting a loyalty, because it's very hard to ask a consumer to switch when she or he, they are satisfied with the service or product. The switching costs are more expensive than the acquisition costs sometimes. 58% of the Hispanics in America are under 33 years old. 52 are under 18 years old. So these are not only sizable in terms of consumer group, but they are in the right moment that some decisions like home insurance, car insurance, they are probably going to be their first decision ever.
Yes.
And you want their first decision to be yours.
And you're talking about loyalty potentially for a long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're doing well your product, your service, your customer service, there's a good chance that they're going to stick with you. So right now is the time. You can start small, but be consistent and intentional about your investments with this segment. And ideally surround yourself with experts. I hope the book helps a little bit, but this is a decision that you cannot postpone anymore.
Right. Isaac, so much interesting stuff to think about. Thank you for all this time today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
There are almost 40,000 Chinese restaurants in the U.S., and there is a reason for that, according to author Curtis Chin. He dishes out the details on that history, along with his own coming-of-age and coming-out story at his family's restaurant in 1980s Detroit. Chin spoke with our Rayner Ramirez about his memoir, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant.
My mom taught me my first lessons. Before diving into math, English, and geography, she began with a little American history.
Curtis Chin spills the tea in his funny and self-deprecating coming-of-age memoir, Everything I learned in a Chinese restaurant. On the menu, his view of the world growing up as a gay Chinese American from the back of his family's restaurant in Detroit's Chinatown in the 1980s.
Anytime my dad met someone who he thought had an interesting job or seemed happy in life, he would call all 6 of his kids to run over and barrage these people with questions, asking them, what do you do for a living? How did you get your job? How much money do you make? You know, and I think this idea of not being afraid of different people from different backgrounds, not being afraid of asking questions or even asking for help, that's a useful tool that has really served me really well in life.
And the restaurant served Chin's family for many generations. It was started by his great-great-grandfather in the 1940s.
Chinese restaurants play a really major part in the history of not just Chinese Americans, but Asian Americans because of something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. One of the few exceptions was owning a Chinese restaurant. And that's why you see so many Chinese restaurants around, because that was one of the few ways that we could actually come in and immigrate to this country. My great-great-grandfather didn't necessarily have a lot of cooking experience. He decided to open a Chinese restaurant so he could sponsor his kids to come over and join him in America.
Chung's became a Detroit mainstay for more than 60 years, attracting folks from all walks of life, including then Detroit Mayor Coleman Young and the actor Yul Brynner.
I am king as I was born to be.
But the 1980s was a particularly tough time for Motor City.
The auto industry was struggling, there was crack cocaine, AIDS. I personally knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18.
One of them was a member of his family association, 27-year-old Vincent Chin, who was out celebrating his bachelor party at a bar when
these 2 white auto workers said, it's because of you, Mother Blanks, that we're out of work. And they proceeded to bash his head in with a baseball bat. When you hear about something like that, this vicious attack, you're obviously going to check the newspapers, right? And find out how they're covering it. But no stories appeared. Nothing on the TV, nothing in print.
It was a pivotal moment for the budding writer.
After realizing that nobody was writing the story, I literally lugged the typewriter from our office into the dining room, and I just started typing away these letters to the editor, asking them to cover the story.
Vincent Chin died after 4 days in the hospital. The assailants, Ronald Ebbins and Michael Nitz, were convicted of manslaughter. They were sentenced to 3 years probation, ordered to pay a $3,000 fine. They served no jail time.
I really thought that if the media had just done a better job of covering our community, I don't think that judge would have given that sentence, right? I think he would have understood that Vincent was a person, an American, right? And he deserved equal rights. That's why, for me, I've always just been on this journey of making sure that our stories are told, you know, as Asian Americans.
Chin's passion for writing would take him to New York City, where he co-founded what's now become a mecca of sorts, the Asian American Writers Workshop, now in its 32nd year, and to Los Angeles, where he began his memoir with the lines, "For here or to go," sharing the hurdles he floats through in his ongoing journey.
The coming out process is really something you do throughout your whole life. It isn't just a singular thing, and at the end of the day, there's only the one person that's the most important person to come out to is yourself.
For Book It, this is Rayner Ramirez.
Now to another edition of The Fine Print. Andrew Albanese, executive editor at Publishers Weekly, is back with us to talk book news. Thanks for coming by, Andrew.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for having me.
So glad you're here. So one of the headlines we're talking about, women topping the bestseller list in 2023. Tell us more.
It was a big year for women, and the 2023 bestseller list. 17 of the top 25 spots on the Publishers Weekly list were occupied by women authors this year, albeit doubles. There were a couple of authors that had more than one slot on the list, but pretty much, you know, almost a historic showing on the list this year for women. The big books on the bestseller list this year were by Colleen Hoover, which, you know, she had 3 books that were on the list this
Always
year.
a blockbuster.
Starts With Us, Ends With Us, and Verity.
Yeah.
And Rebecca Yarros.
Yes.
So that really is the one. That series did incredibly well this year. 2 of her books were on the list this year, and there's another one coming out very soon, if it's not out already.
There's a lot of buzz right now about this romantasy genre, the combination of fantasy and romance. Was that part of what fueled that list?
Absolutely. And more broadly, I think you can say the romantasy genre was kind of made by TikTok, or should we say Book Talk, which is the bookish community on TikTok. And there were a number of books that were fueling the rise in romantasy for this year. And more, I think publishers are looking to really capitalize on this going forward. I think you're going to see a lot more romantasy. They've been acquiring a lot of it. It's in the pipeline now. So you're going to get your fill of romantasy in the coming years, I'm sure.
I wanted to touch on the book Lessons in Chemistry because the television series based on the book came out in 23. What did that do in terms of the book sales?
Well, it never hurts book sales to have a good, Apple series, right?
Yeah.
But, that book actually was a phenomenon on its own and before the Apple series came out. So it's, maybe the series drove some more sales. In fact, I'm sure a series drove more sales, but I would say the series actually was catapulted more by the book.
Huh.
The book was incredibly popular. I think it was on the 2022, every week of the 2022 bestseller list.
Wow.
It was really pushed in book clubs. The publisher did a great job marketing that book. It was picked up by public libraries. It just really had it really struck a chord, and the publisher did a great job capitalizing on it. And for sure, the Apple series took it probably to a new level.
And there were a couple of really big memoirs in 23, right?
23 was a huge year for memoir, right? You had Prince Harry, Spare, which I think was maybe the second overall top-selling book of the year, maybe third. You also had Barbara Streisand, who sold 200,000 copies. Her book didn't come out till November. She probably would have been higher up on the list. And that book was $47, and it sold 200,000 copies in last 6 weeks of the year. Britney Spears, huge memoir. There were just, a ton of great, Matthew Perry, sad story there, right? His memoir came out as well. So memoirs were a huge part of the mix this year, and they helped drive nonfiction sales to new levels. Nonfiction sales were really down about 10% in 2022. They were only down 3% in 2023, and a lot of that is on the backs of these really strong selling memoirs.
So speaking of the sales generally, let's talk about the year now that it's over. Print sales were down, right? But not as much as was feared. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So print sales were down about 3%, just under 3% for 2023. The year before, they were down 6.5%. And, those are some pretty rough numbers to look at, but you have to look at these sort of the last 5 years, the pandemic era, really. Sales really went crazy during the pandemic. They were up considerably. So, when is it a good thing to have a 3% decline? Well, when you've had a 20% increase.
Yes, I suppose that's true.
Publishers are feeling a lot better about where they are, a lot more optimistic for 2024. They think things have stabilized a little bit at this point. They're still up about 5% from where they would be under normal circumstances from 2019.
Just a last question for you, Andrew. I read that children's book sales are struggling.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
That is a really concerning trend right now. So picture book sales down a little bit, but they're going to be stable, right? You always have the perennial bestsellers. Every new parent buys them for their children.
Sure.
And you have great new stuff coming out. The real concern here is the 8 to 11, the middle grade readers. And Kristen McLean, who is a great analyst with Circana BookScan, they power the PW bestseller lists and they track industry sales. She noted in a recent analysis that I totally agree with, being a parent of young children, that the chain was broken during the pandemic. When kids were out of school and libraries were closed and bookstores were closed, that sort of the peer-to-peer discovery, word of mouth thing got broken. And it was filled by screens. Right? They were going to school. We spent all our lives as parents trying to keep our kids off screens.
Off screens.
And they were forced on them for those 2 years. And that changed a lot of habits as well. So it's a real challenge, I think, for publishers to find a way to get those middle graders back into discovering and reading and talking about books, because they don't have book talk.
Right. And it's so important. We know how important it is.
It's vital. It's vital. And the publishers realize this as well. I have every faith they're going to find a way to mend the broken chain. But it definitely, 2023 was a stark year for kids' book sales, for sure.
All right. Very interesting stuff. Thanks so much for being here, Andrew.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Always good to see you.
And you as well.
Next up, Uncensored with author and columnist Linda Stasi. As always, she has plenty to say about what she's reading.
The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley is a retelling of the legend of King Arthur and the mystical world of Camelot. But this time, the tale is told not from the point of view of Arthur or even his Knights of the Round Table, but through the eyes, emotions, and observations of the women behind the legend. At 876 pages, this is not a quick read, nor one to slog through, but a book that you need to absorb. You'd think that a mega best-selling book about Camelot, which won accolades and prizes, would be whimsical and light, but The Mists of Avalon, written in 1984, was and remains controversial. Why? How about incest, anti-Christianity, male dominance over women's lives, and most importantly, child sexual abuse, all of which are featured in the book as seemingly commonplace in the 5th century. That part is probably not fiction. I told you it was controversial. Morgan is a tiny priestess from the magical, mystical Isle of Avalon, which is disappearing forever in the mist, mostly due to the rise of Christianity. Before he became king and before he became Christian, Arthur was tricked into an incestuous relationship with Morgan. They didn't know they were siblings, and a child is conceived. Queen Guinevere, Arthur's future wife, meantime, is a religious fanatic who wants to wipe out all pagan religions. But why the weird sexual segments in a book about Camelot? I was shocked to discover after reading Mists of Avalon that Marion Zimmer Bradley was posthumously accused by her own daughter of sexual abuse. To top that, the author was even married to a convicted child molester. This is a true case of love the art, revile the artist. Okay, fast forward 40 years to a new book, You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique, which is being hailed as a true work of art. Well, hailed everywhere, but here that is. This is a novel about the last days of Montezuma, who is not portrayed as the monumental figure we've all read about, but as a magic mushroom-guzzling slob who sleeps a lot. And there's also a lot of talk about human sacrifices. I think the author was going for Monty Python, but ended up with bad Quentin Tarantino, which is an oxymoron in and of itself, I think. The language is modern, which I found off-putting. I mean, can you buy Montezuma griping about the, quote, mother effing gods? Another character appearing calm even though he was, quote, about to lose his, let's call it stuff, even though that's not how it's worded in the book. There's much farting, man parts grabbing, and other dumb things that would make it a must-read for teenage boys. But it jumps around so much that I can't imagine that even they'd stay with it. And oh yes, there are conquistadors. I can't believe I read the same book as the reviewers who think that You Dreamed of Empires is genius. They must be dreaming, or maybe they're guzzling magic mushrooms. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for being here. A quick reminder to check us out on social. We'd love to hear from you and tell us what you're reading. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.